Breakthroughs in neuroscience are changing our understanding of mental health, and these insights couldn't come too soon. One of the researchers driving this science is Dr. Leanne Williams, director of the Precision Mental Health and Wellness Center and a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford. We spoke with Dr. Williams about a radical new approach to mental health that harnesses brain insights.
I'm Leanne Williams. My mission is to accelerate the revolution in understanding mental health, informed by breakthroughs in neuroscience. All of us want a thriving life and a sense of purpose. Knowing about our brain and mental health can be one of our greatest assets. Your brain is like a giant neural circuit board, one that is miraculous in its complexity and efficiency. Even though your brain weighs only a few pounds, it is made up of 100 billion brain cells. These cells communicate together using an electrochemical language. They form networks I call circuits. Circuits are incredibly amenable to change. Every time you feel, think, or act, different circuits are firing and wiring together. As they fire and wire together, they form the thought patterns that make us who we are. It's natural that the brain sometimes gets stuck in patterns we can't shift without help. If our brain circuits short circuit over and over, maybe because of chronic uncontrollable stress, it's hard to break the cycle. These short circuits aren't a form of weakness. They're not personality flaws. They're biology interacting with our experience.
Though we all experience negative thought patterns from time to time, especially when under stress, it's when these thought patterns recur constantly or become stuck that mental health challenges such as depression and anxiety can arise. Dr. Williams has done revolutionary research using MRI technology of the brain patterns of patients with clinical depression and anxiety, and has identified 8 distinct types of stuck thought patterns, which he calls biotypes. Understanding these biotypes gives us the opportunity to go upstream to identify these common thought patterns when they occur so that we can address them before they become stuck.
Just as there are different types of cancer, each with its own symptoms and course of treatment, we now know there are different types of depression. I call these biotypes. Our knowledge of these 8 subtypes will allow us to create more targeted solutions that can lead to real improvement in people's lives. It isn't the case that negative stress will inevitably cause depression. Negative stress is toxic when it pushes us beyond our coping limits. Biotypes help us understand the different ways that negative stress can express itself. Our brains are like a battery. We only have a certain amount of power every day, and negative stress can drain the battery. When we recognize these thought patterns and behaviors when they're occurring, such as worrying, speaking about oneself negatively, or having trouble thinking clearly, think of them like alerts that we should address before the battery runs critically low. Remember, you might find that your brain circuits tend to get stretched in the same ways. Right now, we're going to explore these biotypes and the thoughts and behaviors associated with each. Some of the descriptions might sound familiar to you. You might say, hey, that's me. If so, it doesn't necessarily mean you're struggling with clinical depression. If you do recognize yourself in any of these biotypes, that's a big step in understanding and empowering yourself. We'll talk about how you can turn these insights into meaningful action. Let's take a look at these 8 biotypes and the thought patterns and behaviors affiliated with each. We all have inner thoughts and moments of reflection. We all worry. Do you ever find yourself stuck in a loop of brooding self-reflection that you can't get out of, to the point that it negatively affects your life and keeps you from being productive, finding joy and going about your day? If so, that's rumination. This biotype is characterized by extreme brooding and dwelling on negative thoughts and worries, which can result in feeling paralyzed and worthless. A necessary baseline function of the brain is to detect what is relevant to attend to in both our internal and our external worlds. In an anxious avoidance biotype, the salient circuit of the brain becomes extra tuned into internal changes, like physical signs of anxiety or pain, as well as to external changes in the world around us, like new social situations or sounds. We can end up feeling overwhelmed with stimulation, and we may want to dampen it down by avoiding and getting away from sources of stimulation. Think about someone who is hypersensitive to light or sound, or fearful of social situations, speaking in public, and so on. Anxious avoidance is an extreme version of that behavior. The negative bias biotype. This biotype occurs when we find ourselves stuck in a cycle of negative thought patterns. As a result, our capacity to receive positive information gets shut down. Our brain is naturally hardwired to react more quickly to negative than positive information. This is actually necessary. It's necessary for our survival, not only physically, but also in other settings like in the workplace. Usually negative reactions also resolve quickly. The negative bias biotype occurs when negative reactions persist and they're reinforced, so that we end up stuck in a negative reaction loop. The threat response biotype is a specific form of negative bias, where our fight or flight response actually stays on and we're in alarm mode. Normally our brain returns back to its usual baseline after a threat-related event. But imagine an extreme form of feeling fight or flight, possibly triggered by some kind of trauma, and you find yourself stuck in alarm mode and unable to recover. Emotional numbness. This biotype refers to a loss of the ability to feel pleasure from usual activities and goals. It can develop when we are under intense and chronic stress that leaves us feeling emotionally numb. In this situation, you can imagine how the brain's capacity to respond to anything positive is burned out. We feel empty and not able to get pleasure from social interactions or to feel meaning or purpose in life. The numbness and emptiness of this biotype differentiates it from negative bias, in which we feel strong negative emotions. With emotional numbness, we might find ourselves overindulging in food or alcohol in an attempt to feel any emotion at all. Everything that we used to get excited about doing may now feel like a drag and an effort. Many people I've seen still able to function like high performers at work. They may pay the price by collapsing at night and shutting down the rest of their lives. Context insensitivity. This biotype is a very particular form of emotional numbness. If numbness persists in a chronic state of burnout, the brain may lose the capacity to find one thing more motivating or more important than anything else. Normally, there are different things that motivate us to do something that might give us a burst or a sense of energy that motivates us to keep moving through our day. Maybe a project at work or a forthcoming vacation. But if a context insensitivity biotype develops, motivation and context are lost. This may be one of the most difficult biotypes to treat because it is a state of near collapse. In this situation, it is usually impossible to function at work or in relationships. Think of it a little like when hypertension becomes severe enough that it puts you at risk of a stroke. Inattention. In this biotype, your capacity to sustain attention over time is disrupted. Basic functions at work and at home may become extremely difficult or impossible. It may feel quite exhausting to force yourself to pay attention to the task at hand. We don't typically associate inattention with depression or anxiety, but it's actually quite common. Think about the times you're experiencing negative stress or feeling anxious. It's really hard to concentrate, isn't it? Cognitive fog. This biotype arises from a disruption in the circuit involved in conscious will, the one used to control our thoughts and actions in response to current goals. If you undergo a period of sustained stress and the source of that stress is not in your control, this circuit will be under pressure and a cognitive fog biotype might appear. In this situation, your brain may feel foggy rather than sharp. It's hard to execute on decisions, to implement tasks at work and home, to plan ahead, and to regulate unwanted reactions. There isn't a nice, neat relationship between stress and depression. The key is to think about what feels like a negative stressor to you, and how equipped do you feel to control it or cope. Some of us will naturally have a hypersensitive brain circuit engaged by the negative bias biotype. This doesn't mean you will get clinical depression. It does likely mean that you need more recovery time after a negative stress. The recharge strategies we explore today are ways in which we can recharge the battery both in the moment when we feel stressed and as preventative measures from keeping negative stress from becoming cumulative and draining us in the first place. Some of the recharge strategies we'll explore, like sleep or exercise, can help us build resilience over the long haul and address all biotypes and their associated thought patterns. Others are more specific to one thought pattern or another, like worrying or feeling emotionally numb. You'll be able to explore them all at your speed and in your preferred order. Let's do a quick exercise to test our knowledge of each biotype. Hope you're paying attention.